Hey, welcome to the Virtual Sky Report, and we're going to show you kind of the highlights that's happening in the current night sky. My name is Jim Todd. I'm a Director of Space Science Education at OMSI. And so let's take a look at what's up. And just recently, we had an amazing SpaceX launch occurred on May 30th. Look at that, the brand new spacesuit, and they even got into the Tulsa. And that's their family, Doug and Bob, the astronauts. And this is the first of the commercial exploration aboard the SpaceX and the Dragon. And so they've been testing for some time now. And this is the first manned commercial launch from a U.S. soil in 9 years. Look at that. Wouldn't that be nice to travel in that? So they got on board into the car. And so they had this social distancing implied here, but they were to talk to their families, wives and son. On the other side that you see there, which is blocked from the car, not only is that son right there, both parents are astronauts. How cool is that? To have that son right there can say, both of my parents have been to the International Space Station. Okay, so they closed up and then they headed out to the pad where the Apollo 11 launched on 39A pad. And look at the interior. Isn't that nice? Totally new design. It's all touchscreen. And they elevated the seat so they can get closer to the screen. So everything's all go. And they were delayed by 1 day to do the launch. Okay? And so the next time, it was great. And so even the tower is different. So they had a very successful launch on the SpaceX, and they were heading their way to the International Space Station. And so it was, I think in the neighborhood, 10 million viewers watched the launch live. And so this was the first time in 9 years they were able to launch from Kennedy Space Center. And so it was a very smooth launch. The astronauts describe it beautiful. And it's much better than the shuttle. Well, for one thing, the shuttle is much bigger mass, so it's going to be a rougher ride. Okay? And so we see the first stage and the second stage. And then you'll see in just a moment here, the first stage undocked. And then it turned around and went back to land on a platform. That's new. Okay? So they're very successful undocking of the stage 1 and stage 2. You can see it in the view of these cameras. And they're at the platform out in the Atlantic Ocean. Look very science fiction. Okay? And so they're at the platform, and you had a very odd name. Of course, I always love you. Of course, I still love you. And that's the name of the platform. Okay? Then they were very successful. And returning to that platform, there you go, on the left, they got it down to an arc. And then once they reached orbit, traveling 17,500 miles per hour, they were successful in deployment. And there goes the Dragon heading towards the International Space Station. It only took 19 hours. Okay? And so they were able to give a brief tour inside of the Dragon. And it's so neat, so clean. This is a far cry from the Apollo, the Gemini, and the Mercury. And then 19 hours later, they were very successful in making a docking with the International Space Station. Unfortunately for us, we weren't able to see the sighting over Portland, because the timing wasn't just quite right. Okay? But there was a very successful docking. A few hours later, before you know it, Doug and Bob were on the International Space Station. 2 cosmonauts there, and then Chris Cassidy, commander. And the only hiccup they said that they had is that, I believe that's Bob, he banged his head on the door. Okay, upon entry. That was the only hiccup. You see, he'll come around, and he seemed to be working on this spot on his head. Okay, and there you go. So that was the only hiccup they had. And the crew, Doug and Bob, are going to remain on the space station till about August 2nd. And then they're going to come back on the Dragon and do a splash landing. So it's a very successful mission. And then the InSight finally was able to push that mole down into the hole. It's been several months. They've been trying to figure out how to keep that mole to go down into the soil of Mars. So they came up with the idea to use a robotic arm to give it a little nudge and give it a little bit of soil and start digging. And so far, it's been working. And then, bad news. James Webb is delayed again, the 9th time. And it's because of the coronavirus. And the crew have not been able to do the testing and work on the James Webb. So the launch won't happen in 2021, maybe 2022. And then we had the summer solstice on June 20th, 2:43 p.m. At that point, the North Pole is leaning toward the sun, giving us summer. And at that time, the sun was directly over the Tropic of Cancer. And we had our longest day for the year. Down in the southern hemisphere is opposite. Okay? And there's even a monument in Taiwan. If you were to go there, it's right on the Tropic of Cancer. If you were to stand there, the shadow would be right underneath the monument. And people will go there to witness the sun directly overhead at the zenith. And then see no shadow. And then we have coming up on the full moon, past the full moon, way past the full moon. It was called the strawberry moon, but we have the full moon coming up very soon on July 4th, and then something's going to happen. And look at this, Mary Jackson, okay, one of the prominent figure from the Hidden Figures movie, was instrumental in getting the IBM computers going. And they finally got her name on the building at headquarters. So great news for Mary Jackson. And then the sun is still blank. We're at a solar minimum. We're at the transition between 24 and 25. This curve indicates the number of sunspots. And then 2020, we are at a minimum because the sun is a variable star, expanding and contracting. Right, every 11 years. And so far already, we've had just over 70% of the year. Here we are coming up to July, that the sun has been spotless. So we anticipate that. Okay? But lately, there's been some sunspots. Okay? So this is what the sun looks like the past 48 hours. Don't see a lot of activity. You still see the prominences around the edge, but on the sun, you don't see much at all, no sunspots at all. Okay? However, just reported today, there's a sunspot emerging from the southern hemisphere of the sun. So it is blank, but every once in a while we get the sunspot. So where are the planets? The planets right now are mainly, not in the evening, in the west, but in the morning. So we got Venus, that's very prominent now in the morning sky. So if you go out and look toward the east, you see a really bright object. That's Venus. You're going to reach the 4.5 magnitude pretty soon. Now Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn is just now starting to emerge from the eastern horizon during the evening. So they're going to be showstoppers for this coming summer. That's all people are going to see and talk about. Yeah, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Mercury will eventually become a morning object. So everything will occur in the morning. And so how is this happening? Here's the Earth facing toward the sun. It's noon, Mercury, and Venus. And the Mercury's coming around. There's Venus. It's already in the morning. And there's Jupiter and Saturn. Earth is going in between. So what's happening in July 14th and July 20th, Jupiter and Saturn will reach opposition, meaning that'll be a closest distance to the Earth and visible all night long. And so you go out, like on July 4th, look towards the southeast, you'll see Jupiter and Saturn. And we just had an annular eclipse in the other side of the world. Okay? And so they were able to witness a nice long annular eclipse. What that means that the disk of the moon is smaller than the disk of the sun, creating the ring of fire. So that went on the 21st, which was the new moon. Okay? So with that question, we will get our annular eclipse in Oregon in 2023. Circle your calendar, October 14th. This is the view at Crater Lake. The center line is going to be right over this center of Crater Lake. It's going to be a sunrise eclipse. It will be the first contact. It's going to go mostly over southern Oregon and then head down south. So mark your calendar for October 14th, 2023. Can you imagine the fall foliage with this viewing? And so it's going to be an annular eclipse, just like this. It's going to be roughly about 4.5 minutes long. So what's next? We have a penumbral eclipse coming up on July 4th. Penumbral, kind of a non-event. And what's happening here is the penumbral outer shadow of the Earth is going to move into the moon's going to move into the shadow. But unfortunately for us, it's only going to be right at moonrise, and even at maximum eclipse, it's only going to be 3 degrees above the horizon. So really a non-event. Right? So even then, when the moon is rising, it's going to be in twilight, can't see the shadow, and so on. But technically, there is an eclipse. Right? So it looks something like this. There's the moon rising. 35% of the moon will be into the penumbral shadow. It has to be in the umbra, get the darkest part of the Earth's shadow on July 4th. Then we'll have the second penumbral eclipse on November 29th. And at that time, the moon will be at almost 60 degrees above the horizon, but it'll be after midnight. So we'll never have another opportunity to see the eclipse. Interested in looking at the International Space Station. It's visible now in the morning. It will be in the beginning part of July in the morning, and then the end of July, it'll become visible in the evening. Great summer object to look at. You get the starting time on Spot the Station on the NASA website. Okay? And that's it for the Virtual Sky Report. We hope to see you soon. And soon we can get the planetarium opened up and running. And we later on, hopefully, sometime this summer.
Hello and welcome to OMSI's Virtual Science Pub. My name is John Farmer. I work in the marketing department here at OMSI, and I'm going to be your host tonight. Like you, I'm pretty excited to learn more about operating a rover on Mars. And I'm actually really curious why it takes about 500 people working behind the scenes to move the joystick, so to speak. I'm going to take a quick moment to thank our members, your support. So if we have members out there, your support is what makes a lot of this possible, now more than ever. OMSI is a private nonprofit organization, and we rely on earned revenue like ticket sales and contributions from donors, members, and supporters from across the region, like you. So thank you for your support. It really makes a difference. As I'm sure most of you know, we are committed here at OMSI to sparking curiosity and igniting imaginations. So to help everyone out while they've been at home and while they still are at home, we've crafted and curated all sorts of really fun, engaging science activities and experiments to inspire you to experience the wonder of science from wherever you are. Just visit omsi.edu for more information and resources. Check out the At Home section. And if you do any of the science activities, please send us photos or videos. We would love to see how great a scientist you really are. Now, putting on these live shows takes a lot of work, and we have an amazing partner that helps us make this happen. So a big thank you and a big shout out to CellaStream for providing the live streaming services for tonight's Science Pub. We really appreciate their support. I also hope you enjoyed tonight's opening presentation on the night sky. That was super cool. Jim Todd is great. He's our Director of Space Science Education. And you can find out more about the Kendall Planetarium on our website at omsi.edu/planetarium. Now, for those of you who don't know, big, exciting, happy news. We are excited to welcome you back into the museum. That's right. Body Worlds in the Cycle of Light is open for visitors. We also are running tours on the USS Blueback submarine. Now, I highly recommend you purchase your tickets in advance. Just go to omsi.edu. And to meet the state guidelines and also help limit the spread of COVID-19, we have implemented some changes throughout the museum. And all of those changes and new procedures are all outlined on our website. Also, more big news. We are hosting our first virtual OMSI After Dark. We just said, you know what, it's been too long. We got to have some extra fun around here. So we're hosting Zest Fest. Amazing that it rhymes. I had no idea how they worked that out. But basically, we're going to get together online and enjoy some delicious spicy foods. So if you love spicy stuff, this is for you. We're going to have a 2-hour program on Friday, July 24th, 7 to 9 p.m. We've got science demos. We're going to be listening and talking to hot sauce experts. We'll have music, fire eaters. We're going to watch some guy do some live ice carving. I mean, it sounds pretty much like an OMSI After Dark, if you ask me. Tickets are $50, but they include 6 hot sauces and 4 spicy snacks. I've seen the vendor list, and the stuff looks amazing. It's also 15 extra bucks if you want us to ship it straight to your home, anywhere in the US, or you can pick it up at OMSI the week of the event. Just go to our website again, to omsi.edu/zestfest for more info. Speaking of vendors and food and yumminess, there is something that you guys can do right now to support your local community. We have some wonderful food and beverage vendors that we have long-standing partnerships and relationships with. And I would encourage you all to put the pub back into Science Pub. So go ahead, order some delicious food and tasty beverages from one of our partners around the state. All right, tonight's schedule will be very similar to our regular Science Pub program. And for those of you who don't know what a regular Science Pub looks like, we're going to begin with a Mars-themed trivia game that's a warm-up for tonight's talk. So get your pen and paper so you can participate. Then after that, we'll have about an hour-long lecture by Gregory Villar. And for the Q&A, you can submit your questions at any point during the lecture via the comments in our live feed. We'll collect them all after the lecture, and I'll ask your questions to our speaker. Now, if you enjoyed tonight's lecture, please consider making a donation or purchasing a Science Pub pint glass. We'll post the links in the comments section for more info. And don't worry, no pressure to donate. Our mission at OMSI is to inspire curiosity by creating engaging science learning experiences for people of all ages and backgrounds. So just sit back, relax, and get ready for a great lecture right after our trivia. So this week, I'm excited because we have one of our amazing exhibit developers. joining us to play along live with you at home. Please give a warm welcome to Catherine Cornai. Catherine, this is a round of applause here. All right, Catherine, welcome. It's great to see you.
Thank you. It's great to be participating.
So, Catherine, what are you looking forward to learning most tonight?
I am really curious about, as you said, all the people it takes to get to Mars.
Right?
What an endeavor this is. The idea that it takes hundreds of people to get something relatively small to a relatively close planet.
Yeah.
Kind of blows my mind.
And 500 people just to drive the thing.
Exactly.
Could you imagine getting off the off-ramp? I mean, that would take forever.
It's a lot of signaling.
Yeah, that's so much. Okay. Well, let's get started. So everyone at home, grab a pen or pencil and paper. Maybe make it a little interesting, play for bragging rights. Maybe who has to do the dishes next, take out the trash, all that stuff. Make it fun. We've got 10 multiple choice questions. I'll read out a question. I'll give you some time to guess and then reveal the answer before moving on to the next one. Are we ready? First question. In what year did NASA announce the start of the Mars exploration program, initially called the Mars Surveyor Program? Was it in 1985, 1990, 1994, or 1998? I can think of some good movies that came out in those years.
Takes a while to plan these things, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm going to go B, 1990.
1990. Okay. B, final answer, 1990. Answer is, C, 1994. 1994. That actually, I don't know about you, but that actually makes me kind of feel a bit old, and I don't know about you, but have you noticed how the older we get, the earlier it gets late?
Exactly.
I don't know if that's just, that may just be me.
I totally agree.
All right. So, NASA chose to explore Mars for many reasons, including the fact that it is a terrestrial planet and has a diverse geology like Earth. So, how deep is the deepest canyon, the Valles Marineris, on Mars? Is it 2 miles, 4 miles, 6 miles, or 8 miles?
I know it's deeper than the Grand Canyon, but I don't remember how deep the Grand Canyon is. So that's not helping me.
The Grand Canyon is pretty deep.
It is pretty deep. I'm going to go B, 4 miles.
4 miles. Okay, B, final answer, 4 miles. Correct. Oh, and you're right. The Grand Canyon is 1 mile, about just over 1 mile. It's so funny. Just yesterday, I wrote a poem about the Grand Canyon. It was
very
deep.
Nice.
It's a deep poem. All right.
Of course.
All right. Okay, now we're getting into some atmosphere here. Mars' atmosphere is composed primarily of which type of gas? Is it argon, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, or oxygen?
I think it's carbon dioxide, C.
Okay, C. We're going to go C, final answer, carbon dioxide. Boom. Wow, 96% carbon dioxide. I'm kind of wondering if we couldn't create a better atmosphere by maybe dimming the lights and playing some smooth jazz on Mars.
Yeah,
would that help?
make it a little more habitable.
Maybe that would help.
Maybe. We'll try. We'll suggest that.
Some candles. Okay. The Earth. Here we go. Question 4. The Earth is 93 million miles away from the sun. But how far away is Mars? We got a bunch of random numbers here for you to randomly choose from.
And they're all pretty similar. This is a very tricky one.
Is it 142, 151, 155, or 162 million miles?
I'm going to go D, 162.
162, it's kind of go long. This is kind of like the Hail Mary pass at the end of the football game. Okay, here we go. You're going D, final answer.
D.
Ooh, way closer. Way closer.
Well, relatively way closer.
Well, okay. Way closer. In space, 142 million miles in space is kind of like, it's funny. I actually just read an article entitled, Mars is Humming. Scientists aren't sure why. And I thought to myself, maybe it just doesn't know the words.
That's a good answer.
That's why I hum. Okay, number 5. How many Earth days is 1 year on Mars? Okay, so Earth days is 1 year. Okay. Is it 395, 450, 525, or 687 days? And this is Earth days translating into 1 Mars year.
I'm going to go D, 687 days.
Okay. So that's like almost, that's like what?
2 years.
Almost 2 years.
2 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. Well, that's rough, but yeah. Boom. Look at that.
Hey.
Look at that. 687 days. You know, this is tangentially related, but it's a funny joke. When he was 12, Copernicus's parents sat him down and said, "Young man, when are you going to realize that the world does not revolve around you?"
I like it. I like it.
I was looking for a way to connect that one, and I just figured I'd just go for it. Okay.
I like it.
Number 6. What was the first mission to Mars that included a rover? Okay. Are we going with Mars Pathfinder, Mars Observer, Viking, or Mars Exploration?
I wonder what exactly you mean by rover here, but I'm sure I'll find out. I'm going to go.
I think rover, you know, the little guy that comes out and like scoots around and checks things out. I mean, we're going to learn about it tonight. So
I'm going to go Viking. See.
Ooh, Viking. That kind of makes sense because, you know, the Vikings had their boats and they would row around and they'd get out.
Totally the same thing. Yeah.
Hey. Oh, Pathfinder.
Oh, Pathfinder.
There we go. Mars Pathfinder was the first one. You know, thinking about that Copernicus thing, some people don't know why planets orbit the sun. And I think it's because they just don't understand the gravity of the situation.
That is totally it. And I think my cat in the background agrees, if you can hear the cat.
There you go. Oh, okay. Okay, here we go. Question 7. The Curiosity rover explores Gale Crater and acquires rock, soil, and air samples for onboard analysis. How many instruments does it have? Again, a smattering of random numbers for you and everyone at home to choose from. Does it have 4, 6, 10, or 14 science instruments aboard the Curiosity rover?
I know that scientists like to pack as much as they can, because if you're going this far, you might as well.
That is absolutely I would be going down the same path as you.
Yeah. So I'm going to go top of the list, 14.
14. Again, we're going Hail Mary with this, you know, end of the football game, throw it as far as you can. 14, final answer.
Final answer.
Oh, 10.
Oh, 10.
I would have gone 14. I thought 14 was safe. You know, it's also kind of interesting that on Earth, science is driven by curiosity, but on Mars, curiosity is driven by scientists.
That's so good. That's a real good one. I like it.
Oh, geez. Okay. These jokes. Okay. Number 8, another Curiosity rover question. So Curiosity rover has been on Mars for 8 years and has produced some interesting results and facts. However, here's the question. Which of these is not true? So A, Curiosity finds evidence of persistent liquid water in the past, a suitable home for life, organic carbon found in Mars rocks, or radiation does not pose a health risk to humans. So which of these is not true?
I'm pretty sure that radiation is still bad news. So I'm going to go D.
I'm kind of with you on that one because I'm pretty sure they found, I'm pretty sure we found sources of water. We could probably say, you know, so yeah, I'm with you on that. So D, final answer. Yep, yes. There you go. Lots of, it looks like a lot of radiation. You know, I once invested in some uranium, but I lost all the money because my profit decayed.
Aha! Beautiful, beautiful.
Oh, it's so bad. Okay, number 9. We're almost there. NASA is launching a new mission to Mars, the Perseverance rover, to search for signs of ancient life and collect samples of rocks and sediment for potential return to Earth. How long is it going to take the rover to get to Mars? 5.5 months, which I'm guessing is 5 months, 5 months, 2 weeks. The point things are kind of throwing me off. 5.5 months, 6.2 months, 7 months, or 8.5 months.
I'm going to guess 7 months. It's a pretty long journey, but I don't think it's 8.5 months long.
I was going to say for me, it was a toss up between 6 and 7.
Okay.
But 7 sounds good. I like where you're going with that, just maybe a little bit over. So C, final answer. It is 7 months. You know, it's funny. I actually have a friend who travels around in a Zeppelin because he doesn't realize there are quicker methods to travel.
Yes.
You know, but he's happy enough though, because ignorance is blimps.
The question is, what would you do for 7 months? You know, that's an awful long journey.
I mean, that's a lot. You could write a book.
You could.
If you were a robot that wrote books. Okay.
That's true.
Okay, here we go. Oh, NASA is, okay, last question. Here we go. Big money. NASA is sending up not only the Perseverance rover, but another specialty machine to test on Mars. What type of machine is it? Is it a helicopter, a drone, a drill, or a small robot?
These all sound really awesome. I'm pretty sure I've heard it's a helicopter, which I think is incredible. That'll be super fun.
It would be. So is that your final answer? Final answer, helicopter?
Helicopter.
Oh man, look at that. The Mars helicopter, Ingenuity. Oh man, you know, when I think about I have to admit, I'm a bit of a helicopter parent, but it's okay. I really love it because I get to show my kids things they would never have seen from the ground.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, hey, thank you for joining us, Catherine.
Thank you.
That was a lot of fun.
Super fun.
Also, as I say to everyone, thank you for enduring my relentless onslaught of puns. Just for good measure, I'm going to leave you with one more. My friend told me he doesn't understand cloning. I told him that makes 2 of us. She just left. She's like, get me out of here. All right. Well, let's actually listen to the expert now. Okay. I'm going to introduce our speaker. His name is Gregory Villar. He has held several roles on the Mars Science Laboratory Flight Project that provided him experience in all phases of the mission. He tested operations for launch, cruise and landing, and worked Mars time surface operations with the responsibility of planning rover activities daily. In addition, Gregory tested software for the sampling system using Curiosity's twin test rover on Earth. Gregory graduated with a bachelor's degree in physics and a master's degree in astronautical engineering. He participated in several internship programs at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory before being hired as a systems engineer in 2010. Gregory has spent the past 7 years working on the Mars 2020 flight project and is part of the team that is responsible for safely landing the Perseverance rover on Mars. Welcome to Science Pub, and take it away, Gregory.
All right. Thanks, John. I really appreciate the introduction there. And those puns were really, really funny. I mean, I kind of enjoyed the trivia questions as well, because I didn't come up with them, but they were very exciting and I got together. Actually, when I was putting together my bio for this talk and I was refreshing it, it was quite amusing to me that I realized that I've been working at NASA for over 10 years. And really, what I really appreciated was the fact that it hasn't felt that long. And I think that's because I work on something so amazing, right? Like Mars rovers, literally out of this world. And that makes it very easy for me to share my experiences because I love what I do. I came up with this talk a few years ago, and the reason why I came up with this talk is because of 2 reasons. One, I started out at NASA as an intern, and ironically, I did not know at the time that my NASA center worked on Mars missions, which is pretty unacceptable if you think about it now. So I had an amazing opportunity to work on Curiosity. And after that, I made it somewhat of a mission to kind of educate interns at JPL and also people around me on the magnitude of what it really takes to operate a rover on Mars. But also, as I go through my presentation, I'm going to share with you some of my personal experiences. And I hope that some of you watching out there will kind of be inspired and motivated to pursue your dream job. Because I've been fortunate enough to have my dream job. And I think that's very important to do something that you really love, because, whenever you do something that you love, it'll feel like nothing at all. I've worked there for over a decade now, and honestly, there's not been a day, or very rarely, where I've experienced a day where I felt like I was going into work. So with that, let me start where it all began. This is me, a younger, more carefree, cuter version of myself. And of course, growing up, I had a cousin that I looked up to, who I idolized, and pretty much whatever he wanted to do, I was imitating, even though I did not know what it was. So if he said he wanted to be a lawyer, I said, oh, I want to be a lawyer too. But one time I remember we were on a road trip at night, and we were kind of looking at the stars as young kids. And all of a sudden he said, I want to be an astronomer. And I had no idea what that was, but since he wanted to do it, I said I wanted to be an astronomer too. So that's where it led me to kind of my career, where I studied physics. And when I was a sophomore in my physics, getting my physics degree, I had this amazing opportunity to work on this telescope. It's called the Palomar Telescope. And my professor at the time said that he had a previous student who was working at Caltech, and they were looking for these undergraduate students to help with their experiment. So I got to spend 2 amazing weekends in Palomar. For those of you who are familiar with San Diego, it's near the San Diego area in California. And I remember traveling up that time in a car with my classmate, and it was pitch black by the time we got up there. And what you can see here in the top right is the dome of the observatory. And so my very, very first experience was kind of going into this dome, pitch black, could not see anything at all. And I remember hearing the sound of the motors, and it was just kind of a humming sound. And I was like, what's happening? And you can see the slits, they actually started to slowly open up. And the light from the moon shined into the dome and illuminated this telescope, which you see right here. And I remember looking up and saying, wow, like this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. This telescope was like 2 or 3 stories tall, and I got to use this for the whole weekend. And so I did this for actually 2 weekends over the span of a few months. And then I spent 2 years as an intern kind of analyzing the data. And by the time I was a junior or senior in college, I was able to get my first publication as third author in this paper. So from there, that brought me into getting a NASA scholarship at a NASA center of my choice. And, at the time, I was very excited, and I'm a Southern California resident as well. And so I chose to go to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. But just to provide a little more context here, a lot of people think that NASA is just they think astronauts, right? They really don't see that there's a lot of other things that NASA provides. And NASA really operates under 4 different umbrellas. There is aeronautics, which is kind of furthering our space flight or Earth flight capabilities. We have things for space technology, so things that we develop to further our ability to explore in space, which also helps with our technologies here on Earth. And then there's also the science division or section where mostly exploring all of the planets and all of the universe, which we'll talk a lot about today. And then, of course, the astronauts, which a lot of people are familiar with. There are about 10 major NASA centers across the US, and I work at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Southern California. Most people are familiar with, the Kennedy Space Center, where we do a lot of our launches, or the Johnson Space Center in Houston, where we have mission control. Houston, we have a problem from Apollo 13. But in Southern California, we have JPL, where I work, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And it's a kind of special center, right? It's a center that's run by Caltech, the California Institute of Technology, on behalf of NASA. And if you guys ever, after the whole pandemic ends and we have more people able to come, you guys can visit JPL, and it's actually twice the size of Disneyland. So it's a huge kind of adult version of Disneyland for engineers and scientists. And JPL's specialty is to develop missions that you would use to explore our universe. So whether it's things in our own solar system, like the sun or all of our planets, or our own planet. We have a lot of missions right now that are going around observing our own planets. But most popularly, which is why you guys are here today, is to talk about the Mars rovers. But before I got to exploring rovers on Mars, I worked as an intern. And I spent 2 years as an intern. A year and a half of that was working on these objects called planetary nebula. They're these nice, colorful objects you see at the very top. And they're just kind of the end state of stars. And it's really cool because I got to work with data from the Hubble Space Telescope and also the Spitzer Telescope. And then I was also able to work on the Jupiter impact. So in 2009, there's an object that impacted Jupiter. And I spent a summer working with one of my mentors, and we were able to use a telescope in Hawaii from JPL. So throughout my internship, there will be several nights of observing from JPL, remotely operating a telescope in Hawaii. But after that, I graduated and I realized I needed a job. So I kind of used my network as an intern and started talking to different supervisors at JPL saying, hey, I've been doing science at JPL for 2 years and now I want to kind of explore engineering. And lucky for me, that led me to work on the Curiosity rover. And so there's a lot of experience that I've got for about a year or so. And it was very, very fortunate because I got to work with a lot of amazing people and I learned a lot of different things, which I will be sharing with you today. Okay, so Curiosity. Curiosity was the most sophisticated, biggest capable piece of equipment we've ever sent to Mars. Its main goal was to understand if Mars was ever habitable at some point in the past. If you can imagine the scale of this, it's kind of like a car, the size of a car. It's about 2,000 pounds, and it's just heavily equipped with a lot of different things. It has an arm that extends like 7 feet, about 200 pounds. It has 10 different cameras. It has a bunch of science experiments. It has its own laboratory in its body. There's a lot of great resources you can check online to learn about the Curiosity rover, but its main mission was, again, to understand if Mars was ever habitable at some point in the past. And during its prime mission, we were able to discover that, yes, in fact, that is the case, that Mars was habitable at some point in the past. So let's start from the beginning of the mission. Part of what I want you to understand in this talk is that there's so many people involved in all steps of the process. Curiosity landed on Mars in 2012, but really all the work began about a decade before that. And so at launch, we launched from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. And there's a whole organization there responsible for building the rocket and getting our vehicle ready to go into Mars. And at the same time, there's a team, so the team that builds the rocket, there's a team that is kind of mission control in Florida. And at the same time, we have people at our mission control in Pasadena, California at JPL. And the whole idea is similar to kind of when the astronauts launch, is all the control of the spacecraft is at the launch site. But the moment we lift off, that control then goes over to our mission control center at JPL. And so again, there's a lot of different teams, a lot of different people moving in parts here. And this is just the launch phase of the mission. But once we lifted off, we started going through space in what's called the cruise phase of the mission. So you guys are a little oriented here. The rover is inside of what's called an aeroshell. So you can see kind of it tucked in here. This aeroshell will become very important in the next phase. But just to briefly show you, we have a heat shield, which will protect us from the heat later on. We have a back shell, which is this kind of cone-like structure. And then this disc-like structure that the whole aeroshell is attached to is called the cruise stage. And it's called the cruise stage is because it's our kind of primary tool that we use to travel to Mars. When we go to Mars, we don't aim towards Mars right away for planetary protection purposes. And all that means is that if we have this big rocket sending us into space, and for some reason we lose control, we don't want that rocket to hit Mars. So what we do is we aim away from Mars at first, and when we successfully separate from the rocket, we use thrusters on the crew stage to kind of slowly correct our trajectory towards Mars. So we have these little thrusters on board, and that they're used to correct our trajectory, but also to kind of readjust our orientation in space. And that's because we want to keep a certain field of view towards the sun. This spacecraft is solar powered during cruise. So we have solar panels that we want to always keep some sort of pointing to the sun. And we have telecommunications antennas that we want to keep towards Earth. So we need to maintain both the sun and the Earth at all times. Okay, so on Curiosity, this took about 7 or 8 months, and we finally reached Mars. So I'll talk about this a bit. I'll show you a video clip after I walk you through this. But this is called the entry, descent, and landing phase of the mission. Probably the most nerve-wracking phase of the mission. And if you want, you can Google 7 minutes of terror. There's an awesome video on YouTube kind of portraying all this, but I will walk you through this right now because this is my current job. And the ideal here is that we want to slow down the spacecraft that has been traveling through space. And by the time it gets to Mars, it's traveling at about 13,000 miles an hour. 13,000 miles an hour. It's really, really fast. And the job of the entry, descent, and landing system is to get it to the surface of Mars in under 7 minutes. So think about that, slowing down 13,000 miles an hour down to close to zero in just 7 minutes. Now, I say 7 minutes, but again, a system like this took almost a decade to build, right? And at any given time, there are about 50 people working on this for a full 8 to 10 years until it actually happens at Mars. So the way this works is the first thing we do is we separate from the crew stage, that circular structure, and then we go through the atmosphere. And you can imagine as if you're kind of driving a car on the freeway. If you just let go of the gas, the car will slow down, right? Because of air resistance. And that's a similar concept here. We break through the atmosphere, and that's why we have a heat shield, because as we're going through the atmosphere, it generates a lot of friction, and that friction generates heat. So it gets really, really hot. But after that, we slow down to about 900 miles an hour, which is still really fast. You don't want to hit the ground at 900 miles an hour. So from that point, we deploy a supersonic parachute, just a really big parachute that deploys really fast. And that gets us to about 200 miles an hour. From that point on, you can see the rover kind of peeking out. We let go of the heat shield, and now the rover can see the ground with a radar. It has a radar that can tell you speed and height measurements. And when we're at the perfect speed and height measurement, we separate from the whole back shell parachute system, and we come down on these rockets. So the rover has its own jetpack, and it comes off the back shell and the parachute, and the back shell and the parachute kind of just flies away. And we come down on these rockets, and when the rover is about 60 feet from the ground, the jetpack lowers the rover on these cables. And then the rover deploys its wheels like landing gear. And when it touches the ground, then the jetpack, or what we call the descent stage, cuts the bridles and then flies away. So again, all of that has to happen in success over 7 minutes, and it's very, very nerve-wracking. So I want to show you a clip of what it was like on landing night. You'll see it on the next slide, and just kind of see how people are reacting as we progress through this series of events.
Things are looking good. Coming up on entry. Vehicle reports entry interface. We are beginning to feel the atmosphere as we go in here. It is reporting that we are seeing G's on the order of 11 to 12 Earth G's. Commercial 2 is starting. We are now getting telemetry from Odyssey. We should have parachute deploy around Mach 1.7. Parachute is deployed. We are decelerating. Heat shield has separated. We're on the ground. We're down to 90 meters per second at an altitude of 6.5 kilometers descending. Standing by for backshelf separation. We are in powered flight. We're at altitude of 1 kilometer descending. Standing by for sky crane. Sky crane is started.
Signal to us, you remain strong.
Touchdown confirmed. We're safe on Mars.
You got thumbnails.
All right, so that was the clip of landing night. And, you know, sometimes I have to explain because when I give this talk live, people kind of chuckle at it or some people are very amazed by it. But you can see a lot of people are reacting differently. Like one guy's just jumping up and down and there are people crying. And it's really hard to appreciate why that's happening because, you know, if you did not experience kind of working on this project, you know, you don't really understand or can feel why people are reacting that way. And that's because there are people who've worked literally close to 10 years, you know, really, really hard on something that they love to do. But they also sacrifice time, like days off and holidays from their friends and family, just working lots of hours on something that they love to do. And so to culminate in an experience like that is just, you know, really fulfilling and just a huge release of emotions that is just well worth it from that type of event happening successfully. But so that was the main control room at JPL. There was actually, you know, again, in the spirit of this talk, a lot of other people involved. And you guys get a little special treat today because I have some behind the scenes of what we call the EVL war room. And that's where I was that night. I was in that main control room. There was about, I'd say like five or so EDL engineers, and the rest of the EDL team was in a separate room. And so this is a really cool experience because if you're listening to the narration, my current boss, he said touchdown confirmed. But really, we didn't want the public to know that we didn't want to say touchdown confirmed until we were absolutely sure. So internally, we had a checklist of 3 items that we wanted to be sure of that was actually the case before we told the rest of the world that it was confirmed. So you can kind of hear it in this next clip as you can see us, listening to these indicators. And we were told to not celebrate when we started hearing these 3 things because we did not want to react prematurely. So you'll kind of see us bottling up our emotions at one point, and then when we hear the touchdown confirmed, then we actually we kind of release everything. So you see it here. You'll hear the indicators: touchdown Tango Delta nominal, which is really a signal from the rover saying the rover senses that it touched the ground, and so it says a little tweet to us saying Tango Delta nominal. The next thing you'll hear is RIMU stable. All that means is that we have a sensor on board that tells us that we are stable on the ground. Because you can imagine that if the rover touched the ground, it could be sliding or rolling or something that didn't go well. So we want to make sure that the rover is stable on the ground. So you'll hear RIMU stable. And then the last thing you'll see is the rover could touch the ground it could be stable, but the jetpack for some reason could maybe smashed onto the rover, right? And the way we figured out if that was true or not is if our communications was still working. So someone will say comm still okay or comm is good. And after those three things, you'll hear touchdown confirmed. So we'll play this next clip and see if you can catch and find me in this next clip.
Flat place, we're coming in ready for sky crane. Down to 10 meters per second, 40 meters altitude. Sky crane is started.
We got no throttle down. We got.
Sending at about 0.75 meters per second as expected. Expecting bridle cut shortly.
Signal to us, you remain strong.
Tango Delta nominal.
Hang on.
Yep.
Radio stable.
Just telemetry.
Radio stable.
UHF is good. Touchdown confirmed. We're seeing.
Okay, so that clip really never gets old. And, I was very fortunate to be part of this mission again. And so you'll hear a little bit more about kind of what happened to me afterwards. But at this point, Curiosity reached the surface of Mars. Its landing site was this area called Gale Crater. It is just a huge crater on Mars with a mountain in the center of it. And this is a really cool spot because similar to like the Grand Canyon, or it kind of tells a story of Mars, right? Geologists likes layers of a planet because it's kind of like a history book of the planet where they can kind of analyze the past of the planet. And we get to rover operations. So here is what we did for the first 3 months on Mars. When we operate a rover on Mars, it takes a lot of effort of a lot of different people. And the first thing you need to consider here is kind of the distance between Earth and Mars. Depending where they are in their orbits, it could take a signal anywhere between 4 to 20 minutes to travel between the two planets. And that's very important because, for example, say you had a remote control car. The moment you push forward, the car will almost immediately go forward, right? And the moment you tell it to stop, it will stop. But that's not the case for a rover on Mars. When you push forward, it could take 4 to 20 minutes for the rover to start moving forward. And if you see like a cliff coming and you say stop, by the time it actually stops, 4 to 20 minutes later, it could be too late, right? And so the way we operate a rover on Mars is that we send commands little by little. So here's a little diagram. The ideal here is that the rover, it wakes up during the daytime and it operates during the daytime, even though it has a nuclear power source. The rover itself is not solar powered, but the spacecraft that took it there was. And the idea is that before it wakes up, we send it a set of commands for it to execute during the day. Now, we like to operate mostly during the day because it does get cold on Mars and it's more energy efficient to operate during the day when you don't need to use heaters as much. And when you use heaters, then you use your energy. But anyway, so the rover wakes up, does the commands it's supposed to do for the day. And before it goes to sleep, it sends kind of information down to Earth so that there are people that are planning and getting ready for the next day on Mars while the rover is sleeping and recharging. And then by the end of 2 shifts here on Earth, we do the same thing. We send up a set of commands to the rover to start the next day. Now, this timeline on the very top is actually a Mars time. And so, believe it or not, time on Mars is a little different. It's slightly longer. It's about 40 longer as compared to Earth every day. And so what that means for us operating a rover is that when we landed on August 6, 2012, our shift started at 1 a.m. And then a week later, it started at 4 a.m. And then the week after, it started at 8, and then at noon, and at 4 p.m, and at 8 at night. And this continued on for 3 months. everyone there worked on what's called Mars time. And this is a really cool experience to be in because, before this, we had science teams around the world. We had engineers kind of scattered. But for these 3 months, all of us were in kind of one area at JPL. It was really cool to kind of to live with it, not really live, but be experiencing operations together with everyone. And time can get a little confusing. And I hear that back on previous missions, there was a local watch store that made little watches that had Mars time. So people would walk around at JPL with both an Earth watch and a Mars watch and kind of tell the difference in time. But of course, in 2012, we were a little more sophisticated and we had our flight software engineers develop apps, Mars time apps. So we had our own version of the Mars clocks on our phones. Okay, so I like showing this slide because I feel like sometimes people think this is what it takes to operate a rover on Mars. Really, it's not just one person with a joystick moving it and shooting lasers from the joystick. And even this slide here, where it's kind of like a typical control room you see on TV. This has about 30 to 50 people on their consoles. And really, this is still just the tip of the iceberg, right? You're going to see a lot of different areas that is involved in operating a rover on Mars. So let's see what that looks like. I call this the daily operation cycle. In our terms, we say it's called the tactical timeline. And I'm going to walk you through what that looks like every day on Mars time operations. So here's the rover. It's doing what we told it to do for the day, whether it's driving or, in this case, shooting its awesome laser. And before it goes to bed, it will send us data. And so the data gets sent from the rover to these orbiters or satellites that go around Mars. So the rover actually transmits its data to these orbiters, and these orbiters send the information to Earth. Now, moving forward, you're going to see these boxes on the top right. It represents a person and a number next to that person. And that was my attempt to kind of explain how many people are involved in that part of the cycle. In this case, these are 2 separate spacecraft with their own science objectives doing their own mission, but they're nice enough to kind of relay data for our rover to Earth. And on any given day, there's about 25 people in each of these projects just helping us get information back down to Earth. So let's start keeping track. There's 50 people here. When the data comes down from space, it gets received by what's called the Deep Space Network. So the Deep Space Network is kind of a set of satellites in 3 places around the world. There are a set of these in Goldstone, California, which is kind of between LA and Las Vegas. There's a set of these in Canberra, Australia, and another set in Madrid, Spain. And the idea is that, they're actually in 3 places because if they were just in one place, so for example, say my eyes were Goldstone, California, and I was the Earth rotating, then there would always be a part of the sky that I cannot see. So we put these satellites in 3 different places around the world so that we can always see all over the universe. Now, of course, there's a lot of people involved in building these satellites and operating them. But for the most part, when we start getting information, it's a kind of an automated process. So for Curiosity, there was about 5 people kind of just managing, kind of receiving information from space. But when it comes down to the satellite dishes, whether it's in Goldstone, California, Canberra, Australia, or Madrid, Spain, all the information gets routed back to JPL because JPL also manages the Deep Space Network for NASA. So this is a picture of the dark room, or what we call the dark room at JPL. And again, kind of an automated process, but the idea is that no matter what spacecraft sends information from the universe, it all comes back to JPL and it gets filtered out by projects and then sent back to the projects, whether the project is at JPL, in this case, Curiosity is, or schools or other space agencies around the world. So again, in this part, it's mostly automated, but then there are people watching over it, about 5 people. Okay, so from this point, we get the data and we have about 17 hours to look at the data and plan it for the next day. For all of you 24 fans, I used to watch that show and I loved it, so I try to use this as a reference. And too bad it doesn't really have the Jack Bauer sound effects, but that's why this is here. In any case, okay, so now we have a timer up on the top right, and we bring in the whole team, right? And the first thing we do here is we look at the data from the rover. We have engineers looking at the health of the rover. We want to see if like the power is still good, our batteries are still good. We evaluate if our heaters are still working, if they work the way we wanted them to work. And we actually generate a lot of data on board, right? Between the pictures and all of the science that we're doing. In addition to that, we have scientists who are in their own rooms, right? We have like 10 different instruments on Curiosity, and each of those instruments have their own science teams. So they're off looking at the science that we collected, trying to so that they can bring back and report back on what they did for the day. And then at that point, about an hour and a half later, when everyone looks at their data, we all get into a room. We call this the Science Operations Working Group. And that's when we spend time quickly reporting what happened yesterday and what we want to do tomorrow. So in this clip, you can see all of the scientists are representatives of the science teams are all sitting in these rows and then this side row here are where the engineers sit. And we spend a few hours kind of reporting out what happened. And then we plan what we want to do the next day. Do we want to drill? Or do we want to take more pictures with our cameras? Or use our science instruments internal to the rover? Or do you just want to go for a drive to move on to another destination? And what you'll see here is that's me on the engineering side. And this thing that's being projected in all of the monitors is what I'm controlling for all these engineers and scientists. This is what's called an activity plan. This is an old picture of that from like 8 years ago. But the way it works is that there's this tool that we use to kind of lay out what we can do during the day on Mars. And it helps us model things because, for example, we want to know how much data all of the pictures we take, or how much energy we use when we use the drill, or when we drive, or we use the laser. So we spend a few hours with engineers and scientists, where scientists are saying, we want to do this, we want to do that, we want to do this. And engineers are like, well, we can't do that, but we can do this at the same time. And we put it all in this tool and just kind of work collaboratively between scientists and engineers. And I'm there as what's called a science planner, moving all these blocks around and doing some calculations and making sure that we have the resources, again, data or power or just kind of our heater capabilities are all working to be able to do this. And this tool is also really cool because it helps us understand what things we can and cannot do together. So for example, one rule we have is to not drive and use a laser. So if for some reason we put the drive and the laser activity on top of each other, our tool is going to kind of yell at us and say, no, you can't do that. And that's a kind of simplified version of kind of doing checks for us. Okay, so at this point, there's been, about 8 hours has gone by, and that's a full shift, right? A regular, normal working shift. And we still have another 8 hours to go. So at this point, we kind of, we bring in the next team, the team that was initially responsible for understanding what happened on Mars and building a plan, now hands it over to a new set of people. And what they do is they develop sequences. So these are commands that we actually build for the rover. And so every line item in that plan, which is just a picture, the rover is not going to understand the picture. So we need to create these commands or sequences associated with each one of those line items in the plan. And that's done with a lot of different people. Each of those activities has kind of a representative, again, that kind of creates these sequences and delivers it to a person to be able to eventually transform it into a binary form that we send to the spacecraft. Okay, so like at work or school, you want to check your work, obviously. This is a $2.5 billion project, so we don't want to mess anything up. So we have other people look at our work. We do more checks. We have more people look at our work. And we just do lots and lots of checks and just has many eyes on this. And part of what we do as well is we have these laboratories at JPL called test beds, or they're like simulators. So this is me with the twin version of Curiosity. Her name is Maggie in the Mars yard. And the idea is that we never send anything to Mars unless we tested it hundreds of times on Earth first. So Maggie has pretty much the same thing that Curiosity has, minus the nuclear power source and some kind of, some engineering models of the instruments. But we send commands over and over again, making sure that the software and the hardware interact the way that we expect them to interact. So, for example, the drilling commands, right? We drill a lot on Earth and make sure that it works well. And if it doesn't work, then we'll kind of tweak certain parameters and make sure by the time we send it to Mars that it all works fine. And so the idea is that when we have what we want to do for tomorrow, we just use the same command that we've tested hundreds of times, and we just tweak one little number in there or a few to make sure that we know what's actually going to happen. In addition to that, you can see this kind of rover skeleton. It doesn't really have a body; it just has wheels, and this is called the Scarecrow. And the Scarecrow is what the rover driving team uses to test mobility. Gravity on Mars is a little less compared to Earth. So this Scarecrow actually weighs the same on Earth as it does on Mars. And so our rover drivers take this Scarecrow out to the Mars unit JPL or analog sites in the desert on Earth to drive it through different terrains to see the full drive capability that Curiosity has. And so then we know how to drive Curiosity on Mars. Okay, so that's us doing some testing beforehand. And so we kind of make sure we review the testing that we did for the activities that we're about to do on Mars. And with about an hour and a half left, we finally we all get back into one room with management. And we review with management, what we saw yesterday, what we planned earlier in the day, how we turn those into sequences, and revisiting a lot of the testing that we did. And we just kind of get oversight from our management, say like, okay, yeah, we did the right thing. Or like, did you guys check this? Did you do that? Is everything okay? And we get approval. And all that happens, and about within half an hour left to spare, we bring in a new team to get back on console and review what we did. Again, see the rover is doing okay. And once we know that everything's okay with the rover, we send the next set of commands back. So we take it, we radiate it again from the deep space network, right? The satellite dishes we have around the world. And now it goes directly back to Curiosity. When we use the satellites that go around Mars, we use those because there's transmitting much more data compared to when we send commands for the next day. So that was a full life cycle in a day. And just to recap here, so there are about 50 people helping us get communications back from the rover on Mars. So there's two of those spacecraft. The DSN, the Deep Space Network downlink, getting the data from space to Earth. About 5 people processing the data, getting it at JPL. Then we have a bunch of people doing data analysis. So that's the engineers and scientists looking at the data that we received from the previous day, making sure the rover was healthy and doing some quick science, look at the science data. And then we bring in more people to help with the planning for the next day. So we get in that room, the science operations working group. We say, let's do this, let's do that. Can we do this? Can we do that? Yes, let's try to do as much as we can. And then that ends the first shift of the day. And then we bring in a new set of people to turn those into sequences. So we want to turn our plan that is human readable to something that the rover understands. And then after a few hours, we bring in management so that they can kind of see and check what we did. And then we go back. We send the commands. We get back on console, make sure that the rover is still good to go. And then we have a new set of people at the DSN help us radiate to the rover. So if you quickly add all this up, you come up with a number of 265. And you can see that it took 265 people a day to operate a rover on Mars. But you have to think of something else, right? Like if I'm working as a science planner, I can't be working 7 days a week for 3 months. So you really need to staff your team or roles to account for swapping during the week. So I worked 3 to 4 days a week. And then after that, another person took over for me, and then we kept swapping over. But in addition to that, you want to consider backups, right? Like what if someone gets sick or something unexpected happens or people want to take a vacation? So you really multiply that number by 3, and that comes up with almost 800 people, what I came up with for Curiosity. It took almost 800 people to maintain rover operations on Mars. And this is something that kind of blew my mind because I was just in the thick of things, just excited to be working with all these engineers and scientists. And, it wasn't until I made this presentation where I realized, what the magnitude of all the people and all the facilities and all the tools that we use to operate a rover on Mars. And, I was very fortunate because, again, this is like my dream job. And I hope, people out there can understand, like, if you want to achieve your dream job, just do whatever it takes and work really hard to get there, because it is possible to do that as long as you put your mind to it. But I also want to share that, while I was working on Curiosity, kind of a benefit I got was to be able to see a lot of JPL, because Mars missions are very big. And there was one team in particular that I saw kind of working peripherally with on Curiosity, which was the entry, descent, and landing team. And I remember seeing that team and kind of helping them out, saying, I want to work on that team someday, right? So what happened was, I was working surface operations for Curiosity, and I knew some of the EDL guys, the entry, descent, and landing guys. And I would email them or call them saying, hey, I hear you guys are starting the Mars 2020 project. This was in 2012, 2013. And I said, I'm interested if you guys need help. And people were like, oh yeah, we remember what you did on Curiosity. Like, we'd love to have you, but we're kind of starting off slow. We don't really have many jobs right now. And I kept bugging my current boss, Al Chen, and I shoot him an email like once a month, which turned into, every other week, which turned into like phone calls and text. And I remember one day I was in my office and my phone started to ring and it said Al Chen. And I thought to myself, I know what this call is about. So I pick up and Al says, hey, someone on our team is leaving. Do you want his job? And I said, absolutely. And since then, I've been working for the past 7 years on the Mars 2020, or now is known as the Perseverance rover. And that has been an amazing experience because I joined Curiosity a year before launch. So really, the rover was mostly built already. And I kind of missed that building process. And so since I hopped on to 2020, or the Perseverance rover, very early on, I got to see it being built from the ground up. And so these are some images of me early on. The top 2 images, the top left image is us testing a new technology called terrain relative navigation. It's something new that we're using during entry, descent, and landing to better understand where we are in that process. But it's cool because, you only see these devices on the spacecraft at the end product, right? But early in development, we would build these huge rigs and put them on these gantry structures in our Mars yard. And then after that, we moved them into this structure onto a helicopter, which is on the top right. And we put that on a helicopter. And unfortunately, I did not get to fly in the helicopter, but I was helping them install it. And we would take the helicopter and go to analog sites here on Earth for deserts and just kind of testing this technology as if we were on Mars. On the bottom right, you see me with the heat shield for Mars 2020. Very early on, with like no what we call thermal protection system that we would use to protect us from the heat. So this is very early on, and then me in the clean room on the bottom left. I love this picture as well. This is the descent stage for Perseverance. I told you about the jetpack, but it's only the descent stage structure. So you can see it's very bare bones. And I'm going to flip back between 2 pictures. You can see this one and what it looks like today. This is the fully integrated descent stage. But you can see that how early I got to kind of be part of the project, where it was kind of just bare bones. And I got to see this progress all the way up to being built. So this is a really, really, really cool experience. And what you see on the right side here is kind of what's called the sky crane configuration. So if you remember, I told you that the rover gets separated and gets lowered. That's called sky crane. So this is us kind of testing that separation at JPL. Throughout my time on Perseverance, though, I would say kind of one of my favorite moments or year and Perseverance was be able to do parachute testing. So a cool thing about JPL is that there are a lot of different projects and a lot of things to do. And so there was a mission called InSight that landed a few years ago. It was another Mars mission. And while I was working in Mars 2020, the InSight team was testing their parachute in the world's largest wind tunnel. And they needed help. And the help at the time was just setting up GoPro cameras. So I thought to myself, I could do that. So I asked my boss on Perseverance if I can help the InSight team. He said, yeah, go for it. So I spent a few months working in the wind tunnel, which was really, really amazing. It's just imagine a huge warehouse with ginormous fans that are blowing and testing these big parachutes. And that was really cool because I got that few months of experience in the wind tunnel. When it came along to test the Mars 2020 parachutes, the much bigger parachutes, I said, hey, I have experience in that wind tunnel testing InSight's parachutes. Can I do that job? So that ended up being one of my favorite years on 2020, where I spent a whole year planning this parachute test in the world's largest wind tunnel, working with the team at JPL, our parachute vendors, people at the wind tunnel at NASA Ames, and who are now kind of some of my closest friends in the Bay Area. And it was just an amazing opportunity to plan this test over 9 months. We spent 2 months installing all the hardware in the wind tunnel, and we spent a few weeks doing actual parachute testing. So that was very, very exciting for me to be able to participate in this activity. I want to end here with this slide. This is one of the most meaningful pictures in my career. This was the night that we landed Curiosity. And yeah, it was very exciting hearing touchdown confirmed, but seeing these images, which are the first images the rover took and sent to the ground, was kind of the realization like, this is real. And it's really hard to describe the feeling because it's just so surreal. And I was just very happy. And I took this picture with the images right away. And I'm hoping to recreate this for the Perseverance rover when we land in early next year. And again, I'm very fortunate enough to have experienced my dream job. And I hope that this talk kind of motivates some of you out there to pursue your dream job, and that it's really possible to be able to do this. All you got to do is just set your mind to it and find something that you love to do, because if you love what you're doing, then it will never feel like work. And that is the end of my talk.
All right. Well, hey, thank you very much, Gregory. That is, I think fascinating is an understatement. I'm going to go with understatement. Okay, so we're going to move into the next part of our presentation, and this is a Q&A for everyone. So what I'd like to do is just, if you are watching at home, feel free at any point now to put your questions in the comment box there, and then I will ask Gregory. A lot of times, depending on how many questions we have, sometimes our speakers are able to answer the questions after the fact. I have a feeling Gregory's going to be busy in the next couple weeks, so we're going to try and get to as many questions or all the questions as we can tonight. If he's able to answer some follow-up questions in the next few days, that'll be bonus for all of us. But I think he's going to be working on some other things. So so Gregory, this is I'm being a little selfish here, but when I was thinking about the day, because this is my question, I'm trying to unpack this a little bit. You talked us through that whole day sequence, and when you talked about testing things like hundreds of times, like a certain thing is tested 100 times, for example, is that something that's happening that day? Like you test something 100 times, for example, before you're going to do it that evening? or however that works before you hand it off to the team that's going to run it?
Right. Yeah, that's a great clarification question. So actually, no, very rarely, because we don't have enough time, right? We're under a time constraint. So really all the testing is done years beforehand, or if not months beforehand. So we're constantly testing. There's a lot in projects as complex as the Curiosity and Perseverance rover. We go through a testing campaign over and over again, so that when we get to the day of operations, we don't have to do that testing. Now, what I will say is that if, for example, something new comes up and we don't really understand it, then we will do a lot of testing, and we just won't do that activity. We won't rush doing the activity on the next day. If we don't understand it, we're going to take our time and do all the testing, as much testing as we feel comfortable with before we do anything on the rover.
So if you're going to move the rover, for example, X number of feet this way, and there's some rocks in the way or something, you're going to test it and drive it and do all that stuff here on Earth. And it may take, you're saying it could take months before you've successfully tested it before you take that next step.
Yes and no. So most of the stuff, almost most of the situations we've tested on the ground already. But if it's something like driving, I think if you guys follow Curiosity a few years ago, the wheels, you could see that the wheels started deteriorating really quickly. And so something like that, we paused driving for a good amount of time just so that we understand what the problem was. And then we do our own testing here on Earth. That took some time. But other than that, most of the stuff we've tested scenarios over and over again, so that when we're the day of operations, we can see like, yep, just grab those activities and we'll use that because we've tested it plenty of times already.
Oh, I see. Okay. So there's a lot of scenarios that you've already tested. So when it comes time to actually executing certain things, you've got a process or a procedure already in place and tested out that you can say, yep, we're good to go on that. Off we go.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
That helps me, I think, understand. And maybe there was one other person in our audience that asked that question. Who knows?
Okay.
So the first question from our audience is, of all the technologies that were developed for the Curiosity mission, the nuclear power plant, the sky crane, geochem lab, etc., which one do you think will have the biggest impact on designs for future missions?
Ooh, okay. That's a tough question. And I really kind of separate this in two different areas. One is technologies for the rover, because the rover is the device that we use to do science on Mars. And then, because I'm a little biased, the entry, descent, and landing system. And so I will say, I'll try to answer what I think for both is, but for the entry, descent, and landing system, Curiosity was really kind of a really massive rover compared to previous missions. So a lot of it was very innovative. And I think something that was very pivotal was the creation of the sky crane architecture, which will now help us land Perseverance as well, and could be used for future missions, not just on Mars, but other bodies of the planet. Now, in terms of the rover, there's so much to choose from, but I will probably say, we can't get by without the science, right? So a lot of the science instruments, and especially the stuff analytical, the analytical laboratories in the rover. But for Perseverance, I think what helped a lot was the experience of building the arm on Curiosity, because on Perseverance, one of the main things is a thing called the sample caching system. And so what Perseverance is going to do is it's going to collect samples and leave these samples on the ground for potential future return to Earth. And I think something that has enabled the development of that system, a much more complicated system, is kind of the experience that we've had with the robotic arm on Curiosity.
Okay. So wait a second, you're going to take samples from Perseverance and you're going to leave them in place, and then you're going to hopefully at some point collect them and take them back to Earth?
Yeah, so we've never brought anything back from Mars. And part of the goals of Perseverance is to kind of drill into samples on Mars and store these samples in tubes, like little test tubes.
Okay.
And then we would leave these tubes on the ground. And the whole ideal behind Mars exploration the kind of holy grail of Mars exploration, other than, of course, humans visiting Mars, is to bring back samples. And so the way we would achieve that is by two other missions. So after Perseverance, the idea is that we would send another kind of mission that would land a lander. To answer someone's question earlier, landers are robotic missions that just land and stay in place versus rovers, which are missions that actually have wheels that can move around.
Ah, okay.
So the next mission would be a lander that would have a fetch rover, a little small rover that can go out and collect those little sample tubes and bring it back to the lander, which has a rocket. And that rocket would launch the samples into orbit, right? We've never launched anything from Mars yet. And once the sample's in orbit, we would send one more mission, which is another satellite, to the orbit of Mars, capture that sample that's orbiting Mars, and then bring it back to Earth.
This sounds like the
Right.
plot from The Martian.
Yes, it's The Martian, except instead of Mark Watney, we have little test tubes.
Hey, so we have precedent, is what you're saying.
Exactly. I love that movie. Yes.
That is super cool. I'm looking forward to hearing about that. Okay, let's get on to the next question. This is an interesting one. Given that messages from Earth to Mars take several minutes due to the large distance, is it even possible to make corrections to a rover's landing process if something goes wrong?
Oh, that's very good. And maybe something I didn't explicitly explain, but the whole entry, descent, and landing sequence is autonomous. So that's right. There's nothing we can do at that point in time. It's up to the rover and the jetpack and its smarts at that point in time. But that's why we do, again, a lot of testing over years, whether it's mechanical testing or software testing or whatever it may be, because it's an automated process. And at that point, it's like, we have to trust that our baby is grown enough and mature enough to kind of land itself, going through all those atmospheres and environments and getting through all the challenges that it'll experience over 7 minutes. So yeah, it's an autonomous process, and part of the reason why it's also very scary.
And you may have already said this, and I may have already forgotten, but how long does it take for a command to get from JPL or wherever you're controlling the rover to the actual physical rover when it's on Mars? Depending
on where Mars and Earth are in their orbits, anywhere from 4 to 20 minutes.
4 to 20. That seems like a pretty wide gap.
It is, right? I mean, Earth and Mars go around the sun, and this is kind of part of the reason why we only launch to Mars every about 2 years or so. It's called the Mars Launch Opportunity, because that's when Mars and Earth are closest to each other.
That's right.
From above, right? So sometimes they're this close, but sometimes they're this far away, right? Like if this is the sun, Earth and Mars can be this far away, but every so often they will be this close, and that's when we launch to Mars.
And it's every 2 years, because a Mars year is about 2 Earth years ish.
Mars year is about,
right. Remember we said in the trivia, we was about 600 days or 600 and something days. Is that why?
Partly why, but also because that's just how the orbits kind of line up. The orbits kind of line up around that period of time.
Cool. Okay. So between 4 and 20 minutes. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, here's a fun question. How far can the rover travel? And I'm assuming we're talking about Curiosity here. How far can the rover travel during a Mars day? And how far has it traveled from its initial landing site?
Ooh, that is a good question. See, I've not been on the project for 8 years now. But you can quickly look up that information on the Curiosity website. But surprisingly enough, if you the rovers actually don't drive fast. It's kind of really slow from what you're used to seeing, but it's a few meters every day. And so, man, I would have to look. If you guys can look up the information on the Curiosity website, you can see how far it's driven over the past 8 years or so.
So we're talking 5 to 10 feet a day. You're not driving a quarter mile to the next valley. You're just
not a quarter mile, but not quite 5 to 10 feet. I'd say on the order of 10 to 30 meters. So 30 to 90 feet ish.
Okay. So if
I remember correctly.
So if you wanted to move to another spot to drill or whatever, you're looking at about 50 to 100 feet.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
And part of the cool thing about Curiosity and Perseverance is they have this autonomous driving capability. So we can manually tell it where to go, but also because it has cameras and nice software, we can say, go to that rock or that point in the distance, and it actually can autonomously drive itself through obstacles if it needed to.
Oh,
so
nice.
That's a cool capability we have on the rovers.
Okay, great. All right, next question. Has it ever happened that a sequence tested on Maggie, the twin here on Earth, caused physical damage to the rover? So this resulted in a change to the sequence to prevent damage happening on the real rover.
So I personally have not, out of my testing with Maggie, I've never encountered that. But yes, that has been the case, and is exactly the reason why we do all the testing on Earth, right? Because we want to find those problems. When you say physical damage, it could be on a wide variety of things, right? It could be damage because the drill like pushes too hard, or like hits an object not unintentionally, or maybe just the power distribution of the energy to the drill or the motors or whatever. So yeah, there have been issues like that, but that's as expected, right? That's why we have Maggie and why we have other kind of simulation environments to find those problems, so that Curiosity doesn't have to go through them.
Okay. All right. Here, I like this question. What's the reason for the sky crane? Why not just land the delivery mechanism as well?
Landed. Okay. So sorry, what's the lot? Why not? What
is the reason for the sky crane?
Right.
Why not just land the delivery mechanism as well?
Okay, I'm not quite sure what that last part was, but I can tell you why the sky crane.
There we go. Let's go with that.
Okay, prior to Curiosity, we would send rovers, and if people are familiar with that, we would do a similar. The first half was similar, right? We would break through the atmosphere, we would deploy parachutes, but the smaller rovers like Pathfinder, or smaller missions like Pathfinder, which had the Sojourner rover, and the Mars exploration rovers, we actually inflated these airbags around them, and these airbags then were dropped, and the rovers kind of just bounced on the ground before we let them free. But the Curiosity rover was just way too massive, right? Like it would not, airbags were not feasible at all. So the sky crane delivery system, there was actually a lot of concepts before the sky crane. There was a thing called like a pallet lander, right? Where it's like you put a rover on this lander, and like this thing has jets, and it tries to make its way down, and it touches down on this lander, and the rover would drive off. And then there's a lot of different concepts, but the sky crane one tended to be the most efficient method to be able to get by. And it resolves kind of an issue that we have where you can imagine if we had any rockets like the pallet lander, the rocket, as it got closer to the ground, it would kick up a lot of dust, right? Mm-hmm. And that dust would either maybe damage the rover or just make it dirty. So the sky crane was a pretty innovative concept, right? Because it's something that we do on Earth with helicopters, right? We deliver packages, and the jets are like going. And if you start to lower the rover from the distance, then we can kind of get away from a lot more powerful dust uplifting.
Oh, sure.
So there are a lot of reasons, but it's kind of a really nice, elegant solution to be able to just, land the rover and immediately be able to drive if needed, right? There's no, on previous missions, you would have to worry about getting off the platforms or whatever it may be.
Oh, sure. Okay. So, and again, I apologize if you mentioned this before, but where does the actual, so when the sky crane drops it, where does the sky crane go somewhere else and land like 100 meters away? So it doesn't land on top of the rover. How does that work?
Very sharp, because I actually did not explain that. So, right. So the jetpack lowers the rover touches the ground, and the ropes are cut. And then we tell the jetpack beforehand to fly away from the rover. So it actually goes up, turns, and flies in the distance, and specifically flies away from where we want the rover to drive. Because when the jetpack flies away, it just crashes somewhere. And that has fuel and all the devices and everything. Yeah, it crashes off by itself. And the reason why we want to put it in the direction away from the rover is because we don't want it to contaminate any science site that we go to.
Oh, interesting.
So, in short, it flies away, it crashes, and we kind of drive away from it.
Interesting. Okay. Got it. That's interesting. It's that when you were talking about the different options for how to land the rover, it reminded me of like the 5th grade science experiment where you have to do the egg drop, you know, you
Right, exactly.
egg, and how do you get the egg to the ground?
Right.
Okay, next question. Okay, what is your educational background? Sorry if I missed this at the beginning. Wondering how someone gets started on this path.
Ooh, okay. That's a loaded question, but I'll start with the easy part, which is my background. I have a bachelor's in physics and a master's in astronautical engineering. But in order to go onto this path, it really depends on what you want to do, right? Like a lot of people who are enthusiastic about space, I wanted to be an astronaut when I grew up, and I still want to be an astronaut. And one of the pieces of advice that they give you is to not to do something that you love to do. And I think that still applies for this question, right? You should kind of focus on finding something you love to do and then, study that field of interest. If you want to work at NASA, I will say that there's people from all different majors, right? Whether it's science or engineering or business or whatever it may be. And specifically on the rover, right? We don't just have physicists, we have mechanical engineers, we have electrical engineers. I'm what's called a systems engineer. And I tell people this, like especially interns when they come to me, is I got my degree in physics and I do systems engineering. And I had no experience in systems engineering when I got hired as a system engineer. So again, I would say you should find an area that really interests you and study that, because really like a lot of jobs in life, I think most of the training comes on the job. So I think it's more important to kind of learn something that you find more interesting, because you don't want to, really focus too much on what you think a particular job will need. Focus more of what you love to do.
Got it. That sounds great. Very inspirational. Thank you. Okay. Oh, this is an interesting one. In the wind tunnels, do you simulate the gases of the Martian atmosphere?
Ooh, that is very interesting. So I will say when we do testing overall for entry, descent, and landing, it's very hard to do an end-to-end test because of questions like this, right? You can't 100% copy the atmosphere or environments of Mars. So the quick answer is no, but we do try to test. We don't simulate the gases too much. We mostly use the atmosphere that we get from, the surrounding area. But what we do try to match is kind of the deployment conditions of the parachute. So we want to match things like dynamic pressure and the speed at which we deploy the parachute. And that's kind of like a substitute or the best kind of scenario that we have in terms of testing these parachutes. But we also have sounding rocket campaigns and other kind of test campaigns that are not the wind tunnel. If you want to look up a program called Aspire, ASPIRE, it's an acronym for another parachute testing program. But that's where we put the Perseverance parachutes on these sounding rockets, and we launch them into Earth's atmosphere and deploy them supersonically. So really, there's a whole set of test and analysis campaigns to sum up into enough to be somewhat, for us to be comfortable with the testing analysis that we do, to be confident in what we're going to be doing on Mars. And that applies to all parts of the mission, right? It's not just parachutes, it could be anything else that's involved. If we can't simulate exactly what's on Mars, we'll try to do our best to come up with all those pieces so that we are comfortable in that regard.
That's actually something that I've always thought about, because you spend all this time. So let's just take parachute testing. You spend all this time building a structure based off of your calculations, and you deploy it and it shreds to pieces, right?
Yes.
How many times do you have to, let's just take the parachute testing that you worked on. How long does it take to actually physically design and plan and physically build and set up and do the test, and do you just kind of cross your fingers and be like, oh my gosh, please work? I mean, how many times do you have to go through that process?
So it's funny that you brought up this example, because this actually happened between Curiosity and Perseverance. There was a technology demonstration project called the Low Density Supersonic Decelerators. I think in the media, they called it NASA's Flying Saucer Test. And they were testing a lot of different technologies, and one of which were supersonic parachutes. And in their test, parachutes were shredded. And that kind of brought into question, oh no, do we actually understand the physics behind supersonic deployment of parachutes? Long story short, over the span of 2 or 3 years, the Perseverance team and parachute experts were like, we need to revisit this. So we evaluated different parachute options, and even things like we now have a stronger parachute on Perseverance compared to Curiosity. And, it took on the order of, 1 to 2 years kind of brainstorming what we want to do, on the order of 1 to 2 years to kind of design and build a new parachute, and on the order of like 1 to 2 years to test new parachutes. So, depending on where you start and end it, I'd say on somewhere around 2 to 5 years, to come up with something like that. But again, it all depends on what the problem is, right? If it's a smaller problem, it could be weeks or months. Or if it's a much bigger problem, it could be years. And again, just to appreciate the fact that the project is large and complex, right? There's so many pieces, whether it's the rover or the landing system, there's a lot of different things that can happen. So it all really depends.
So you're mitigating the need to build all of these different prototypes with a lot of brainstorming, a lot of design, and a lot of planning is what it sounds like.
Right. Yes. And also with, if you can't do testing or designing, you can also rely on analysis, right?
Sure.
And ideally you do both, right? You do a lot of analysis, like computer or like on paper, and then you test, and then you do testing to confirm your analysis. But if you can't do both, then you do at least one or the other.
Okay. No, that sounds great. I guess if I were in charge, there'd probably be about 100 different things all smashed to pieces, and I'd be pulling my hair out. So that's probably why I'm doing this job instead. Okay. All right. Back to some career stuff. So your bio indicates you did your undergraduate studies at Cal Poly Pomona.
That's right.
Why did you choose that university, and where did you do your graduate studies?
Okay. Cal Poly Pomona. Let's see. So again, I live in Southern California, and at the time, I was when I started college, I actually started as an accounting pre-law major. And after I got my associate's degree, I had my parents sat me down and they said, you should do what you want to do, right? Don't do something because we said for you to be a lawyer or whatever it may be. So I said, well, I love science and I'm good at math. So physics. And, intentionally I wanted to find a good school that kind of was good for engineering. And I wanted to stay local. And so that's why kind of Cal Poly came into my radar. For graduate school, that's kind of an interesting story because I graduated with my bachelor's. I got hired at JPL, which was very fortunate. And during my first year or so, I got hired onto Curiosity. And at the time, I was torn between going back to grad school and working on Curiosity. And actually, JPL provides a tuition reimbursement program. So a lot of us do it at the same time as going to JPL. But I did not want to do it while I was on Curiosity because it was kind of like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. But after we landed and I hopped onto March 2020, JPL paid for my graduate studies at USC. So that's where I went, USC.
Okay. Your California education system. That's wonderful.
Exactly.
All right. Okay, let's see. Oh, here's an interesting question. What precious metals are vital to making this mission happen? Do you take any design concepts from mining equipment? And how do you make sure you don't over-engineer? So three questions in one. Let's start with the first one. What precious metals are vital to making this mission happen? Okay, so I'm not a materials expert in anything, so I don't know exactly all the materials that are involved in the rover. But what I will say is I do know that the wheels are anodized aluminum. So in that regards, aluminum for the wheels. But all the other aspects of the rover, I honestly don't know. What materials we use for that. What was the second part of the question? So the second part is, do you take any design concepts from mining equipment? And I guess you could expand that question just a little bit. Like, are there other like mining equipment or construction equipment or things that you maybe draw inspiration from? Right. So again, I was not part of the
drilling team, but I'd imagine because Curiosity has a drill and now in Perseverance we have the sample caching system, that at least some innovation or design is kind of derived from, experience from like miners or drillers here on Earth. So other than that, I don't have any experience at all in that area, but I'd imagine that, we learn from our experience on Earth and apply that to what we can do on other planets.
And then the third part of this question is, how do you make sure that you don't over-engineer?
Ooh, that's really hard to do, especially with engineers, right? Because that's all they want to do. And I think this is kind of a practical answer, but part of missions like this is we're driven by time, right? There's a certain launch date, and we need to meet that launch date. And so it's a constant balance between meeting schedule and also cost, right? We have a certain budget and schedule, and we need to meet that. But also trying to find the right balance with that and design, right? If we can't come up with a good design, then if we really need to, we'll hold off kind of the next milestone, whether it's launch or whatever it may be. So it's a tough balancing act, right? Because a lot of us are like perfectionists, and we want to make sure that we have the absolute right thing. Yeah. But with the practicality of time and money, we have to use that as a constraint to help us meet our deadlines.
Because if they just said at some point in the future, we're going to launch this thing, you guys just kind of figure it out. You guys would probably play forever, like getting it like just perfectly perfect.
Exactly. I mean, it's more of like just getting it to a point that that we're comfortable within kind of the requirements that are given to us.
Sure. No, that makes sense. Okay, here's an interesting question. How long is the tether that drops the rover from the sky crane? And and to add to that question, how far up is the actual sky crane when it drops the rover?
Right. So by the time we start this process, it's about 60 feet from the ground when we start this process. And I have to remember what this thing is, but I think it's about 20 feet long, about 20, 25 feet long, totally extended.
Okay. So the sky, so not too far, but far enough to prevent a lot, like you were saying, a lot of the dust and debris and all that other stuff.
Right. I will say though, in Curiosity, there was some dust and debris that did get kicked up and get lodged on the rover, but we learned from that, and sort of Perseverance, we're going to do what we can to mitigate that or reduce the amount of kind of dust picking up.
Sure. Okay.
And actually put more, we made the rover a little more robust to be able to withstand those type of damages if needed.
Okay, great. Okay, let's see. Let's see. After the deorbit burn, how much of the delta versus to landing is done by the parachute versus the sky crane?
Okay, I think I can break that question down.
Yeah, maybe break that down. Does that make sense? Okay. Are you able to kind of work with that?
A little bit. Let's see. So I think the question is how much energy. So really, the problem of entry, descent, and landing is reducing energy, right? And really, as mentioned earlier, by the time we approach the atmosphere, we're traveling at about 13,000 miles an hour. So the different components of EDL brings us to different, speeds. And so from 13,000 miles an hour, the aerobraking or the, going through the atmosphere with the heat shield gets us down to about 900 miles an hour. And then from that, we use a parachute, and that parachute brings us to about 200 miles an hour. And then after that, we come down on the jetpack, and that jetpack brings us down to close to zero, right? By the time we get to the sky crane configuration and touching the ground. Around 0.75 meters per second is the touchdown speed. An analogy of that is like the speed that you would be walking down a wedding aisle, right? That's how kind of soft it touches the ground. Oh, wow. So I think the question was really addressing like each of those components, how much energy or what is the speed or velocity that we are at each point in time.
Okay, so you go from 13,000 miles an hour to 900 miles an hour to 200 to walking down the aisle.
right. Walking down a wedding aisle, correct.
That sounds like some relationships I know. From 13,000 miles an hour to the wedding aisle.
Exactly.
We don't have to go into that right now. Okay, Well, hey, it looks like that's all of our questions for now.
Oh,
and
great.
unless there's any last final questions, what I would love to do is say thank you very much. Oh, wait.
Thank you for having me. Oh.
Someone snuck in a final question.
Oh, okay.
How long will the functionalities of the rover last?
Okay. So I like answering this question because I don't know the exact time, but what I will say is that we build rovers or missions in general to span more than what the prime mission is supposed to be. And one of my favorite examples are the Mars exploration rovers, Spirit and Opportunity, where their mission was supposed to last 3 months, I think, their prime mission. And one of them landed for up to 10 years, way longer than their lifetime.
Yeah.
So for something like Curiosity, which landed in 2012 and is still going until today, and Perseverance, which is kind of like the next step of Curiosity, really it's going to last on Mars until something gives up, or it may not even be the power source or the source, because will that last for a while, but it could be a variety of different mechanisms or whatever it may be. And it's really hard to tell when it'll end. But in general, we build things at NASA to withstand 2 or 3 times longer than what their mission is their primary mission is supposed to last.
Got it. So, that makes sense. That makes sense. Okay. Okay. Pending any last minute sneaker wave questions, Gregory, it was wonderful to hear you talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. No problem.
Everyone, thank you so much I hope you enjoyed tonight's event. And if you'd like to watch the video again or share with your friends, you just go to the video section of our Facebook page or our YouTube channel. You can always go there. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for updates on future events and, of course, fun content from OMSI. And I know I mentioned it at the beginning, but please consider supporting Science Pub and making a donation via Facebook donate button. It's just right there on the main page, or you can visit us online, omsi.edu/donate. Now, for next week, we have a super cool, this is a 180 from a Mars rover. We are going to be joined by Stephanie Story. She is the author of a best-selling art historical novels about Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael. We're not sure where Donatello fits into this one, but I'm sure he's there. She's going to help us bridge the divide between art and science and show us how they are complementary. Her lecture will dive deep into how artists like Leonardo, Michelangelo, Raphael, and other great masters of the Renaissance relied on the sciences to transform the art of the Renaissance into the history-changing images we all know today, and will inspire audiences to explore the connection between arts and sciences in their own lives, helping us see that these two fields of study are not so different, but must build on each other to thrive. So once again, thank you so much to our partner Celestream for making tonight's event possible. You guys are great. We love working with you. And as always, you can get more information on our website at omsi.edu. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night, and we look forward to the new rover up on Mars soon. Have a great night, everyone.